Trouble in Paradise podcast is intended for mature audiences. This means you will hear realistic adult language such as and go talk. Audience discretion is advised.
What is knob polishing?
You're gonna make me say this. I am a neglected man.
I like to think that I look like a Jack, even though my name's really Bob.
Does he have danglers or something?
Well, it's time to go do them lighthouse duties.
Sitting in the cheese at the old Walmart to cool off.
That should be the headline. Man tasered in the nuts after stealing beef.
Yeah, but you're not gonna sit in the cheese. You're not gonna sit in the cheese, and you're not gonna put ribeyes down your pants either.
House cleaning is secondary. So what is the Viagra triangle?
Possibly we aid in your digestion.
I don't know if his little hand is smaller than his little ears or what.
Aw, well maybe he has a syndrome.
Want to go check out my RV? It's parked right around the corner. Because I'm pretty sure that I saw some moose knuckle.
No.
There is absolutely some moose knuckle going on.
My swampy friend. What the hell is a swampy friend?
I know. So they're not going to get any scraping on their shaft.
Yes, I'm going to do a downward dog.
Okay, pretty lady. You had on those gosh darn sexy leather looking shorts.
Ladies and gentlemen, and assholes, gather around. It's time for another action-packed episode of
Trouble in Paradise.
Hi, I'm Nigel Kent.
And I'm Jasmine Starr.
Welcome to Trouble in Paradise,
Where we talk about everything amazing, auspicious, awkward, and sometimes even ass-tastic here from Southwest Florida.
And today we're going to be talking about a subject that is all of those things and puzzling and mind-blowing at the same time.
Yeah.
And that is the subject of September 11th, 2001. In fact, we're going to do a series on it. But you have a very special, I guess, interpersonal angle on this event that you decided that you wanted to share with our audience, Jasmine Starr.
I do. In early of October 2015, my then 2.5-year-old son shared with his father and I a remarkable story. At the time, he had a slight cognitive delay and a significant speech delay, which makes it even more remarkable. My ex, being raised in New York, and his father, a retired New York City firefighter, proudly displayed the Twin Towers and city skyline as his screensaver on his cell phone. My son, again only 2, points to the towers and says, 3 towers. He couldn't even say his name without repeating, let alone the word 3 towers, totally unprompted. I even had to rack my brain and Google if there were 3 towers, as my ex was trying to correct him and say, Twin Towers? He kept insisting on 3. He then points to the screensaver and points out World Trade Center Tower 1 in the picture and says, I saw. I walked up, and points up. I can assure you he had never seen anything related to 9/11 prior to this. It was chilling and sad, all the same, as whatever he described was both very real to him and perhaps detailing the life of someone who perished that day. As we look back, people are remembering how many chance decisions and incidents saved the lives of many people and some of the world's biggest celebrities who nearly found themselves at ground zero. Michael Jackson attributes his mother staying up until 3 a.m. and then overslept his meeting scheduled that morning at the top of the World Trade Center. Mark Wahlberg was supposed to be on American Airlines Flight 11, but changed last minute to attend the Toronto Film Festival. Another celebrity that was actually booked on the same flight with Mark Wahlberg was Seth MacFarlane. He attributed his missing of American Airlines Flight 11 to overpartying, and his agent had been given him the wrong flight time. The flight time differed by 10 minutes, causing him to miss the flight. Jim Pierce, cousin to President George W. Bush and manager and director of AON Corporations, was supposed to be on the 105th floor of the South Tower that morning. When a meeting room proved too small for the conference, the location was switched to the Millennium Hotel across the street from the World Trade Center. Pierce later learned that of the 12 people who took over the conference room after the AON team had vacated it, only one person had survived. One of the more controversial people that was supposed to have been in the tower that day was Larry Silverstein. He was the leaseholder of the World Trade Center properties and was hounded by his wife to make sure he went to see the dermatologist on September 11th. Her insistence saved his life because otherwise he would have been in his office at the North Tower on the 88th floor when the plane struck. Also, his 2 adult children, Roger and Lisa, were also not at work that day, both of which worked in the Twin Towers. When it was revealed that the 3 Silversteins had survived the attacks on 9/11, conspiracy theory rumors started bubbling. Larry Silverstein hasn't been popular since the attacks. He's been embroiled in several lawsuits brought on by the victims of the attacks, as well as his own lawsuits against American Airlines, U.S. Airways, and American Airlines seeking compensation for damage caused by the attacks. American businessman Larry Silverstein, who famously signed a 99-year lease on the World Trade Center complex in June of 2001, 2 months before the attacks, is at the center of another story about profiting from the event. The lease that he signed had an insurance policy against terrorism. He was awarded $4.55 billion in his claim. Another celebrity that was supposed to be there was Grammy Award-winning singer Patti Austin. She was scheduled to fly on United Flight 93 on 9/11, but had to change her flight a day earlier because her mother had had a stroke. Therefore, she was moved from the second night of the Michael Jackson tribute concert to the first flight, or the first night. Julie Stauffer was on the 9th season of MTV's The Real World. On the morning of 9/11, she was booked on American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston to LA, but due to a fight with her boyfriend, missed her flight. Olympic gold medalist swimmer Ian Thorpe was also a fashion fanatic. He had been out for a run and wanting to go up to the observation deck of the World Trade Center. He realized he had forgotten his camera. He hailed a cab, hurried back to his hotel, and upon arriving to get his camera, saw that the tower at that point was on fire. The Duchess of York, Sarah Ferguson, was in the NBC studio in an interview with Matt Lauer for her charity, Chances for Children, when the first plane hit the World Trade Center. She was to be meeting with her charity, which was housed on the 101st floor of Tower 1, but was running late after the interview. The last person that was not necessarily supposed to be there, either on the flight, but another star that had a interesting 9/11 related story was Gwyneth Paltrow. There was a woman by the name of Laura Ludstrom Clark who worked at the World Trade Center. Both Paltrow and Clark had been working out earlier in the day, and as Clark was crossing the street in Westlake Village, she was starstruck when she realized Gwyneth Paltrow was driving by. She stopped, and the actress and her exchanged pleasantries. Laura ran a couple minutes behind and missed her train that would have had her sitting at her desk on the 77th floor in Tower 2 had she made her train. She has since contacted Paltrow, and Paltrow agreed on the importance of how a chance meeting can alter fate. And I think it's safe to say that those are just some of the celebrities, but there are multiple stories of people who have had these, be it chance encounters, problems with their car, security badges weren't working. I mean,
Strange frustrations.
Just I'm not one to believe in coincidences, but there are so many revelations that occurred that essentially saved people's lives, and we totally empathize with the people and families of the lives that were lost. But I think Paltrow, she had, and that is a great way to put it, about the importance of how a chance meeting can alter fate.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And there were so many interesting chance, coincidental style details that happened on that day and prior to that day in the shadows. There is no doubt in my mind that 9/11 is the most secretive, coordinated, conspiracy-ridden event of all time. And even the official story about 19 devoutly religious Arab men hijacking airplanes and crashing them into shit is also a conspiracy theory. Okay? It's a story of them conspiring to do that. So this whole thing, 9/11, is about micro conspiracies, macro conspiracies, and the way they're all wrapped together. There are 100 things or 100 different stories about 9/11 that are considered conspiracy theories by the masses and by the mainstream media, and they're dismissed and debunked and all that, but there's evidence for each and every one of them. And what really stands out in my mind about 9/11 is it only takes one of those conspiracy theories to be true to change your view of the world, my view of the world, and everyone's view of the world. So for the next couple of episodes, we're actually going to focus on this terrible event that happened September 11th, 2001. And we're going to go into several of the details about it.
Right,
but before we do that, I'm hoping that you can chime in with some very important information in its own right, which is, how do people get a hold of us, Jasmine Starr, if they want to?
They can get a hold of us. I'm glad you asked me that question. They can get a hold of us at Trouble239 on Instagram, Tipcast239 on Twitter, trouble@trouble239.com to email us. They can find us right here on YouTube on our Trouble in Paradise channel. And our audio versions are available on Apple, Spotify, and Stitcher.
Yep. And now Podchaser is also indexing our show as well. We'd like to thank everybody that has been hanging in there with us. This is actually episode number 37 of the Trouble in Paradise podcast. And without further ado, we're going to go ahead and dive into it. I've actually prepared some notes on something that happened away from New York City that day. And that was the crash of an aircraft in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. This was United Flight 93 that was heading for the West Coast. But before we get into what happened with that flight, because there's really disturbing details about the flight and its passengers, I want to actually talk about a completely different crash that happened almost 2 years earlier. And that was the crash of an aircraft with Payne Stewart, the professional golfer, on board. So Payne Stewart was a famous golf pro in the late 90s. He was a record-smashing pro during the golden age of golf. The kind of guys that looked up to him were guys like Tiger Woods. That's how good he was. And he was in his early 40s when he died in a plane crash. On October 25th, 1999, Payne Stewart was on board a Learjet 35, leaving Orlando for a brief flight to Dallas, along with some golf acquaintances. At some point during the flight, the crew of the Learjet disobeyed a flight path modification from the air traffic controllers, and then eventually the FAA lost contact with the plane. It was still flying, it was still trackable, and it was still on radar, but now they didn't have any radio contact, and it was on a vastly different course than the one that had been planned. Eventually, military fighters were scrambled to observe the Learjet with Payne Stewart on board. Those fighter jets tracked it far, far off course and all the way into South Dakota, over 1,000 miles away from the intended destination of Dallas, Texas. The leading pursuing fighter pilot reported, "The target is descending and he's doing multiple aileron rolls. It looks like he's out of control in a severe descent. Request emergency descent to follow target. It's soon to impact the ground. He's in a descending spiral." So clearly, the plane that Payne Stewart was on was...
That just gives me chills when you read that.
It was in trouble. The flight was in trouble.
Yeah, you can picture exactly the way that's written, what it looked like.
So the impact occurred right after noon, South Dakota time, after a total flight time of 3 hours, 54 minutes, with the aircraft hitting the ground at or above its maximum speed and at an extreme angle. The description given by the fighter pilot seems to indicate a nearly vertical descent or a close to vertical descent. The Learjet crashed in South Dakota just outside Mena in Edmonds County on relatively flat ground and left a crater 42 feet long, 21 feet wide, and 8 feet deep. None of its components remained intact. Now,
And you said it went down at a vertical?
close to it.
Close
yes,
to vertical.
Nearly vertical.
Okay.
So keep those numbers in mind.
Okay.
Because now we're going to talk about Flight 93 on September 11th, 2001, which purportedly crashed in a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, that morning, mid-morning. According to the official report, United Flight 93, which was a Boeing 757-200 series aircraft, impacted at 563 miles per hour at a 40-degree nose-down inverted attitude, which is also a very, very steep angle. The impact left a crater 8 to 10 feet deep and 30 to 50 feet wide. So let's have a digger deep into these. Let's have a tongue twister. Let's have a deeper dig into these numbers because there are several problems here. And for starters, I just want to put this other graphic on the screen for the benefit of those that are viewing on YouTube, because we're going to go into what this looks like in just a few minutes. But one of these craft is from one crash. The other one is from the other, and they're presented here so that you can see
By scale
the difference in size between these two aircraft.
is just in the length of the United flight to the Learjet. I would say scale-wise, the length of the United flight is about 4 times the size of the Lear.
Yeah,
Would
four
you
to
say
five
that's about
times the
accurate?
length. Yep. So remember that the 757-200 that crashed in Shanksville on 9/11 left an impact crater 8 to 10 feet deep and 30 to 50 feet wide. Now, those are official numbers. But my problem there is if you're writing an official report for the federal government, why are you using ranges that are so vague? They're almost useless numbers. I mean, don't you think the National Transportation Safety Board will be able to measure the exact dimensions of the crater?
The only thing I could think of is they're giving, if there were the potential for, I don't want to say skidding because of the, but if it went down at an angle and like there was any kind of a slide that you might have the nose end at 30 feet to like a 50 foot,
I think you're going to see that possibility was not on their mind.
Okay.
As we go a little bit further.
Well, that's good. I'm glad that this is coming up.
So what we're trying to do is figure out what was their motivation in not giving the craters precise dimensions instead of ranges like 8 to 10 feet deep and 30 to 50 feet wide.
Okay.
But for the sake of analysis, we have to assume certain numbers to be true, and I think it's fair to the NTSB investigators to just use their averages, which would be 9 feet deep and 40 feet wide. Is that fair, do you think?
Yeah, the average.
So let's compare these two crashes. In the Payne Stewart crash, the airplane was traveling at or above its maximum rated speed and crashed at an extreme angle after a very sharp descent.
And this is what kind of aircraft again?
This is a Lear 35, which is the one on the bottom of the graphic there.
Okay, so again, significantly smaller
It's a
than
very
the
small
United
craft.
flight.
Yep. Now, in the Flight 93 crash, the airplane was traveling at or above its maximum rated speed and crashed at an extreme angle as well. In this case, we are told by the investigators that the angle of descent was 40 degrees, which is an unlandable angle, even at a regular speed.
Yeah.
Both crashes are similar in that their angle of approach was extreme. They were both traveling at very fast but definitely subsonic speeds. It's likely that they had similar velocities on impact, which the NTSB tells us was approximately 560 miles per hour in the case of Flight 93. Now, let's talk about the differences in the aircraft, which is what you're alluding to.
Mm-hmm.
Payne Stewart's plane, a Learjet 35, was 49 feet long and had a 40-foot wingspan.
Okay.
And you think that's pretty big, but then you consider that the Flight 93 757 was 178 feet long and had a 125-foot wingspan, which is wider than my entire house.
Right.
That's a big bird.
So why is the range only 30 to 50 feet, according to the report?
You're talking about the size of the crater?
Yeah.
It gets,
If you
it
have
gets even more
100
confounding because
if
Payne
you have
Stewart's
a
plane.
wingspan of, what did you say, 175 feet?
Yep.
That's
And
odd.
then you factor in the weight. Okay, Payne Stewart's plane weighed just over 9,000 pounds, or about 4.5 tons.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the United flight weighed 130,000 pounds empty, or about 65 tons. It was probably running at 75 to 85 tons, right?
Because this one was bound from where to where?
It was going from the East Coast to San Francisco, I believe. So it would have been loaded with fuel, which is a whole other
It's
thing.
going to increase the weight substantially.
Yep. And the explosive potential as well. It was scheduled to go from New Jersey to San Francisco, so it wouldn't have had.
Right.
It would have had at least half of its loaded fuel still in its tanks at the time of impact. So the 757 was a firebomb, basically. But
Well,
the Learjet was empty. It had run out of fuel long before its vertical descent, and they actually found out later on that the cabin lost pressure and everybody passed out, and that's why the plane crashed. But it was on autopilot until it ran out of fuel and eventually went down. So how is it possible that Flight 93's impact crater, this is what you're asking, right?
Right.
Is almost the exact same dimensions as the Lear 35s, despite the 757 being 13 times heavier than the Learjet, and despite having 3 times the wingspan and 4 times the length, and they still had the same crater. If we're using the average, it's
Right.
40 feet.
I think it's a logical question and reasonable question to ask.
And there's the other issue too of the Shanksville plane, Flight 93, just being a disintegrating plane, right? Nothing was recovered. Very, very little was recovered, according to the official reports from the Shanksville crash site. There was no debris field. But they're saying that at 560 miles per hour and in a nearly vertical descent, there wouldn't be, because the thing would just explode and everything would be disintegrated. It's not exactly fair to say, because when the Learjet crashed, they were able to get bodily remains. They were able to get golf equipment, golf clubs, oxygen masks. How does that stuff not get destroyed in one crash, but it does in another one?
The only thing I can think of there is you had a plane without fuel, and then you had a plane that was loaded with fuel.
Mm-hmm.
So the incineration factor, I think, would play into that portion of it. But again, zero recovery of anything. I don't know. I'm not one to judge. I would love to, somebody who is a pilot, and you see these like air show gone bad videos and stuff, and they go down like a fireball. But
Yeah,
I
they
do
do.
believe they still have things that they are able to recover even from that.
Yeah. Well, this here is a picture of the impact crater from the Payne Stewart crash. And despite the very, very extreme rate of descent and the near vertical impact angle, they were still able to identify and recover in 1999 both wings and a part of a fuel tank, as well as many other components. No electronic or mechanical components from inside the craft, but there were identifiable pieces of the wings, which in the case of United 93, there weren't. And there should have been, because those materials are made out of titanium, which kerosene can't melt. Kerosene cannot melt or obliterate a wingtip. And they've done tensile strength tests on titanium. I was watching one today where they actually apply 150,000 pound-feet of torque pressure to titanium cubes before they'll compress or bend or lose tensile strength. So the possibility of there being nothing left of Flight 93, it's not possible. And I think that's been shown over and over again. The other thing that kind of got me thinking was this image of, this is the actual Flight 93 crash crater with a fake airplane superimposed for the sake of scale. This is to give you an idea of how big the plane was that crashed that day compared to the size of the actual crater. Now this is a...
It gives me goosebumps when I see this stuff.
Me too. That's why I chase it.
Yeah, it's...
So this is a strip mine. Shanksville, Pennsylvania is a strip mine town. And the reason that this ground cover is largely gray and brown is because it was a recently recovering strip mine operation. So you can see here that if an aircraft it just doesn't look like a good fit, that an aircraft of this size would leave such a small crater here. And there was reportedly already plenty of excavating equipment around this zone, so it would have been very easy to dig out a hole prior to the crash for the people who are saying that there was no plane crash, which is a possibility as well. But you can see this is a minimally decorated or a minimally surveilled crash site. Now, when the DC-8 crashed back in the early 60s, this crash site was loaded to the gills with light plants. You see, they had it lit up so they could work on it all night long. There's tons and tons of people. Well, I mean, there's a dozen or a couple of dozen people just right up to the edge of the crash site.
Yeah.
Journalists. It looks like people in formal dress clothes and stuff. But in the case of Flight 93, there's nothing. I mean, this is a 178-foot long airplane, so these people are at least 200 feet away from this crater.
Okay, but when was this image taken? Do you know?
Well, this is a superimposed image it's comprised of two images, and then
I understand the.
And then he pasted a plane on it so you could see how big the plane is.
No, I understand. Yes, to show the scale and everything, but the image, though.
Were you saying, was this the day of, or 3 days later, or 3 weeks?
Yeah, when you're talking about the...
I don't know. I have no idea. I do remember seeing plenty of video from Shanksville the day of 9/11, the day after 9/11, the week of 9/11, where the same kinds of vague sort of footage were used. There was one photo that they published that showed kind of like a 2 or 3 minutes after the fact, kind of a mushroom cloud, like the kind you would see over a big house fire, I guess.
Okay. Go ahead. You said this is minutes after?
This was 20 to 30 minutes after the crash, yeah.
Okay. I'm going to call bullshit on this one.
I think I'm going to call bullshit on it, too, because it doesn't look like there's enough smoke.
Thank you.
Yep.
If you have...
You saw the smoke on the Twin Towers with all that kerosene burning. This looks nothing like that whatsoever.
If you had a plane of that size burning, I mean, it would be astronomical, the amount of smoke, and I would believe that you would I mean, again, you don't know how far away this image is exactly, but I can't believe that you wouldn't see more if it was like 20, 30 minutes later.
Well, kerosene burns very, very quickly unless it is starved for oxygen. And it's possible that the kerosene all burned off at the point of impact very rapidly. And by the time the guy figured, hey, there's something going on, I need to take a picture, most of the kerosene had burned.
Have you ever been on a flight and you get that smell of jet fuel in the cabin?
Yeah.
How long does that last?
Until you take off, and then it goes away.
Not always.
I hate that smell.
I've been on flights where, you can smell it almost the entire flight for a couple hours, and you're just like, ugh.
Yeah, that would freak me out, man.
Well, I mean, it's not the most comforting feeling, but I can just say that a plane loaded with fuel, I don't think is going to burn off that quick.
Well, kerosene burns fast when it has oxygen. That's one of the things that makes it such a great fuel. You can get very, very small volumes of it to combust with great power.
And jet fuel is kerosene?
Jet fuel is kerosene, yes. It's the same thing. And then they give us a picture, or they gave us a picture of this. Supposedly, this is what a smashed jet engine looks like from a plane that has crashed in vertical descent in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but this is the only one they ever released from the actual crash site.
That's the only photo that's been released of the actual crash site.
Correct. Now, I'm going to tell you another story real quick.
Okay.
But while I'm looking something up, I need you to look up I need you to replay for everybody, if you don't mind, real quick, how they get a hold of us, because I forgot to pull a video, and I need to look it up real quick.
Absolutely. If you need to get a hold of us.
And tell your favorite story about the podcast, too, while you're at it.
You can get a hold of us at Trouble239 on Instagram, Tipcast239 on Twitter, trouble@trouble239.com to email us, or you can reach us here on our YouTube channel, Trouble in Paradise. Audio versions are available on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, and being queued now in Podchaser.
And what is your favorite episode that we've done?
What's my favorite episode?
Yeah.
My favorite so far has been with Steve and Ray. I hope we can get them back on here. It was a great and funny episode. However, Steve has a remarkable story about his experience during 9/11. I don't know if that's something that he would be willing to discuss or not, but I've heard it. I will not share any of it because it's not my story to tell. But wow, it's absolutely incredible. And my heart, after hearing his story, my heart already went out to everybody that was involved in one way or another that day. Like I said, the victims, the families, but all of the first responders and people. I can tell you that he worked for 8 straight months. The days he wasn't working his beat, he was working in recovery efforts. And that's something that a lot of these first responders were doing.
So he was a New York cop who was coming in on his day off to try to recover bodies and parts and things from
He was
Ground Zero.
involved in the recovery process as well as, they just, and I know you're probably ready to go, but I just want to say when it comes to 9/11 and looking at things today, and I've said this to you, why did it take such a tragedy to unite our country where we were so undivided, and now
we were also willing to give up a whole bunch of liberty because we were so blindly taken advantage of, all of us together. We were all fools.
Well, be it fools or not,
Many of us were on the same page. That's for sure.
Right. But I think it's safe to say that, as a country, as a whole, we were extremely united.
Yeah.
And wanted, it was an event that hit everybody at its core in one way or another. And boy,
everybody knows where they were when they first heard the news and saw it on TV.
Yeah. And I really wish there were a way for us now to get that kind of patriotism back into our country, because right now it's a sad time.
I don't want the return of patriotism to be triggered by something like 9/11, though.
No, absolutely not.
Because it was
Absolutely
clearly, like
not,
I said,
and
there's
that's
100
not-
conspiracy theories
that's
about
not
this
the
thing,
answer.
and if one of them is true, then the world is so fucked up that most people
Right.
don't even want to think about it.
Well, and when I said I got goosebumps seeing that scaled image that you showed, something like that. If that's true,
Well, the stuff they
that
expect
just
people
is
to
like-
believe about it is so absurd, yet
That-
everybody defends it and then makes fun of the people who call attention to the fact that it's absurd.
But when you see that, and it's like, and I have an experience where I'm listening to my 2-year-old telling me, I saw, and I walked up, and just to think about the spiritual side of that this poor little soul may have experienced in either, whatever it may be, whatever he experienced was real and unprompted, and it's just very sad.
So it's powerful enough that it's working across generations. It's working spiritually.
Yes.
And that's why it's so important. It's a keystone event in human history,
Yes.
and people have to keep learning about it. And the truth has to be discovered about every aspect of it,
And that's why it's important to ask questions.
which is what we're doing about the Shanksville United 93 flight tonight.
Ask questions.
So in the
yes.
first segment, we talked about how that flight was had some very questionable attributes. The
Yeah.
fact that there was nothing found at the wreckage scene. When we compare it to a comparable crash, we find out that there's some disturbing anomalies in the mathematical details. But that's not it. There's also some really, really questionable details about the people who were on the airplane itself and some of the things that they purportedly said and did in terms of cell phone calls during the flight. And we're going to focus on a woman named CeeCee Lyles, who was a flight attendant on United Flight 93 on September 11th. She was the flight attendant who reportedly called her husband, a police officer named Lorne Lyles, and left a message for him on their home answering machine from inside the airplane, while the airplane was still at an altitude of nearly 20,000 feet. According to Lorne, the caller ID on this message was CeeCee's cell phone number. Now, the official story repeatedly points out that CeeCee used a GTE airphone to place this call. How can this be true? And the reason they say that is because cell phones don't work at that altitude, period.
Right.
They didn't then, they don't now.
Right.
So, but if she used a GTE airphone to place this call, how can Lorne Lyles be testifying that the caller ID on his answering machine was that of his wife's cell phone and not any other phone number?
Well, it's interesting too that after this event, that's whenever a lot of the crackdowns started to happen too, where they might make sure your devices are turned off, and they really became very strict.
It's interesting that you're right. They suddenly wanted all cell phones off.
Yes.
And that wasn't a thing.
Or
I flew a
in-
lot before 9/11, and that was not a thing.
No, it wasn't. Or in airplane mode.
Airplane mode.
Yes.
So
And you had to wait until you were at, you have to wait until a certain point before you can use your electronic devices.
So we've got Lorne Lyles saying that it was his wife's cell phone number on that voicemail, on that voice message. We also got the testimony of Lorne Lyles confirming that, yes, that was the voice of his wife and not some person,
Right.
pretending to be her. So this means that CeeCee Lyles could not have left the voice message while at cruising altitude, because cell phones have never worked at higher than about 8,500 feet, and they still don't. And so one of the following conclusions has to be true, and there's 4 possibilities. The first is that CeeCee Lyles was not actually aboard Flight 93 when it crashed. This would explain the fact that she used her cell phone to contact her husband. The other is that Flight 93 was not at cruising altitude, but at a much lower altitude of a few thousand feet, thus enabling CeeCee Lyles to use her cell phone to contact her husband. Sort of. And I'll tell you why that's a sort of in a minute, because there's another technical limitation.
Okay.
The third possibility is that Lauren Lyles, a police officer, intentionally lied regarding concrete evidence in a national terrorism investigation, which doesn't seem very likely.
I don't agree.
And then Flight 93, this is the fourth possibility, did not crash at all in Shanksville, PA, and the passengers were on the ground at the time of the purported crash. This too would explain the fact that she used her cell phone to contact her husband. According to Lauren Lyles, his wife called a second time, 11 minutes later at 9:58 a.m. Now, the official report on the second phone call agrees with Lauren Lyles that this call was from CeeCee's cell phone. So the idea is that since they were so much closer to the point of impact, they would have been flying at a low enough altitude for the cell phone to work. And the official narrative really needs that to be true. They need that people to believe that fact. But there's problems with that story. You see, cell phones are not just restricted by altitude, but also by the speed at which they're moving. There's a problem in radio called multipath fading that does not allow point-to-point communications to work if one of the stations is moving above and beyond a certain threshold of speed, especially back in 2001 when 2G was state-of-the-art. So on a modern LTE network, cell phones traveling at more than about 220 miles per hour don't work reliably even at ground level, and that's today. But this was back in 2001. If the authorities are to be believed, Flight 93 crashed at a speed of 560 miles per hour. Okay, that's almost 10 miles per minute. And this second call occurred during the last 5 minutes of the plane's descent at 560 miles per hour. So, assuming the altitude of the plane was by then low enough to reach a cell tower, the plane would cover 4 to 6 different 2G cell towers during that single minute that the call presumably lasted. Because Lauren has said that they talked for about a minute. The cellular network would not have been able to keep up with the changes in cell connections, and the call would have been disconnected. The phone simply couldn't work at that speed. Yet that second call came from her cell phone too. Even the authorities agree on that. And the second call was clear enough for her to speak with her husband long enough to tell him she loved him, give a well-wish regarding the children, and it was clear enough for Lauren to hear discernible voices in the background of the call. So my conclusion here is that neither call actually came from Flight 93. How could that be? Were the passengers kidnapped and coerced into making these phone calls? What evidence do we have that corroborates the theory that there was a lot more to the story about United 93 than met the eye? And there is one detail about this that chills me to the bone whenever I hear it, and that's the actual audio of the message that CeeCee Lyles left for Lauren Lyles on the first phone call. Because she called twice. She called at 10:40 something, and she called back at 5 minutes, T-minus 5 minutes to impact. The first time through, she got the voicemail and left a message. The second time through, they actually talked, and there's no recording of it. But I'm going to go ahead and play what the first call sounds like.
The message.
Yep.
Okay.
We also have the dramatic message left by flight attendant CeeCee Lyles in her husband's answering machine before briefly talking to him on her cell phone. As she herself is suggesting, we should listen very carefully.
Tuesday, 9:47 a.m.
Hi, baby. Baby, you have to listen to me carefully. I'm on a plane that's been hijacked. I'm on the plane. I'm calling from the plane. I want to tell you I love you. Please tell my children that.
We, too, can notice the absence of the typical background noise heard inside a plane.
I don't know know what to say. There's 3 guys. They've hijacked the plane. I'm trying to be calm.
After saying goodbye, she seems to fumble with the headset while she whispers a few more words into the mouthpiece.
I hope to be able to see your face again, baby. I love you. Bye.
End of message.
Even by playing the segment several times, it remains difficult to hear anything different from the words, "It's a frame." We also have...
So, given the extraordinary circumstances of the cell phone technology rules being broken during a almost supersonic descent, which cell towers can't deal with, and beginning at altitudes that cell towers can't deal with, somehow she's able to reach him at T-minus 5 minutes. Now, at 10 miles per minute, that means that at a 40-degree rate of descent, she would have been well up in cruising range at the beginning of that call, based on the official information that they've given about this flight. No cell phone works at cruising range, and it didn't back then. Then you have the issue of horizontal travel, where people say, well, maybe they weren't at cruising range. Maybe they were at 3,000 feet. Fine. But they're still crossing 4 to 6 tower cells within a 45 to 1 minute span. And yet somehow she's able to deliver 2 phone calls, one of which we have the blessing of having a recording of. And what did she say at the end of that call?
It's a frame.
It's a frame. She whispers it. Why in the world, if somebody was on a hijacked aircraft, would they say that? It's really hard to... This is one of those ones that really gets my brain bent when I think about it. Because it's proof of how fucked up this conspiracy was.
What was her husband's account of the second phone call?
She called.
When he actually got to speak to her.
He asked her if she was okay. She repeated the information from the first call for the most part, told him that she loved him over and over, and told him to tell the kids how much she loved him, how much she loved them. And then the last words of that call before she hung up were, "Okay, I guess we're going to do this. I guess we're going to do this now."
Now, could that have been... Because the story that has been given to all of us is that you have 4 American heroes that
busted into the cockpit of the plane and crashed it into the ground after subduing the hijackers. That's considered heroism, I guess, right?
Well, I would.
I mean,
consider
you
that,
can't
yeah.
fault them for trying. Look, I'm not trying to say that these guys weren't heroes if they really were.
But that statement, I guess we're going to do this. Maybe a flight attendant, just playing devil's advocate here. A flight attendant would be able to access the cockpit for them to get in.
And she told Lauren that she was speaking with him from the rear of the plane.
Oh, okay.
So if she was 170 feet from the cockpit, or 150, however many feet from the cockpit.
That was on the second phone call. She said she was calling from the back.
It's the official report that she was calling from like row 23 or something, which was close to the rear of the plane. It's a 32-row setup.
The official report.
The official for the first call. The second call said she was calling from her cell phone on the second call. So they would have no way of knowing where on the plane she was.
Right.
And in that event, I believe Lauren said that she told him she was in the back of the plane with a couple of other people.
CeeCee.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
But her relative calm and
right. It was almost where she said, "I'm trying to be calm." I'm like, she's a hell of a good actress because.
And have you ever heard a cell phone that sounds like a
even
phone rattling on a receiver.
even if I had to make a phone call and I was trying to be, I don't know, everybody's different. I don't know. I would be pretty emotional if I knew I was saying goodbye to my, my loved one or my children. Like if I knew that were the end. And I mean, you do hear a little bit of that like shakiness in her voice, but at the beginning, I hate to say it, but it almost was scripted sounding.
It seems scripted, yeah.
Like, or just like very thought out, very methodical, the way that it was. Do I believe that she had anything to do with it? No. But things like coercion and stuff like that are kind of what come to mind.
Well, there's theories that say if she had a gun to her head and she was being promised that she could live if she said these things.
Right.
Well,
that's what, it's like, that's where I get the feeling of like, it reminds me of if you were being held hostage and you have a statement that you're reading, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they gave her access so she could make a call. And I mean, we don't, that's the unfortunate thing, is that we don't know. We can speculate, and those speculations have some pretty damning evidence to support them.
There's a second call, of almost 5-minute long call between another guy on the flight who's the protagonist in the propaganda movie United 93. Almost 5-minute call between him and a GTE airphone operator, which occurs at cruising altitude, which seemed to indicate that the hijackers were not necessarily harassing or hurting the passengers of the plane.
Right.
So I don't think there was any physical duress that was being applied to CeeCee by the hijackers that would have caused her to have to behave in a certain way. And I doubt the hijackers are going to tell her to get on the phone and lie about what they were doing. And that's why this doesn't make any sense. You get the distinct impression that she's lying and she doesn't want to be lying. That's how she sounds to me.
Yeah, that's what I meant, where it sounds scripted.
Yeah.
And then where the scripted part is very robotic sounding, and like I'm reading this and this is what I need to say, and then the part where she's talking about the love, that's when you can hear the emotional side coming through, which is very sad.
That specific phrase that she says
and then
towards the
whisper.
end, she says something like, I hope I get to see you again. It's almost like that possibility has been offered to her. Mm. Because that choice of words at that time is, it really tells a lot more, not just about what she's thinking, but what her interactions have just been with other people around her.
Well, and if you buy into the story of the heroic men that are going to, break into the cockpit, maybe there was hope there that there was going to be a different outcome, because it was known by the people on that flight what happened to the 2 previous flights.
Well, it was known to the flight crew only. It was not known to the passengers because, again, they didn't have any data access at cruising altitude. The GTE phones are one-way devices, and they can't receive calls. There would have been no way, unless somebody happened to be on the phone with a family member, and that family member said, hey, I just turned on the TV. But by the time the news broke, it was 30 to 40 minutes after FAA knew about the impacts. And only a few minutes after flight crews around the country had been notified. They have a direct text messaging system that they can use to send two-way messages from aviation control to pilots and flight crews in the air. I forget what it's called. It's a cool acronym. But so those messages had gone out, but it was moments before, like 5 to 10 minutes before this flight was hijacked. So the possibility of the crew knowing at the point of hijack that the World Trade Center had been hit was very, very... I'm sorry, the possibility of the passengers knowing that was very, very low. My guess is that if if the story is true about the passengers and crew being together and developing a plan to fight back as the story goes in the movie, then certainly at that point the flight crew would have told the passengers, hey, this is what we know. This is some other shit that just went down.
Right.
But it does not... CeeCee's talking points to her husband on that voicemail are all the things that you would want to share if you were trying to get the word out in an alarmist fashion. You know, she doesn't lead off with, hey, I love you so much. I'm you know, this may be the last time we talk. She's always, there's 3 men. They hijacked the plane, the World Trade Center. I mean, it's very, very, and maybe she's just an extremely poised individual. They said that she used to be a cop before she became a flight attendant.
And that's something that, you know, I can say in my profession, when something emergently happens.
Mm-hmm. You get into that mode.
Well, I become very matter of fact and direct.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, and people actually say like how calm that I am, because you have other people that are like, have like the holy craps going on. And I do have the ability to essentially flip that switch. And I bet you don't believe that at all, but it's true. I can flip that switch where I can get very direct, concise. Like if I'm doing my job, boom, 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 boom. But if I'm saying goodbye, as she did in that, you know, it was very, you do hear that shakiness in her voice and everything. And that's just sad as hell. But yeah, you definitely hear that it's a frame whispered. There's no denying that.
Message left by flight attendant CeeCee Lyles in her husband's answering machine before briefly talking to him on her cell phone. As she herself is suggesting, we should listen very carefully.
Tuesday, 9:47 a.m.
Hi, baby. Baby, you have to listen to me carefully. I'm on a plane that's been hijacked. I'm on the plane. I'm calling from the plane. I want to tell you I love you. Please tell my children that.
We too can notice the absence of the typical background noise heard inside a plane.
I don't know what to say. There's 3 guys. They've hijacked the plane. I'm trying to be calm.
After saying goodbye, she seems to fumble with the headset while she whispers a few more words into the mouthpiece.
I hope to be able to see your face again, baby. I love you. Bye.
End of message.
Even by playing the segment several times, it remains difficult to hear anything different from the words, "It's a frame."
And I think that wouldn't be an alarming thing at all if the official narrative wasn't so damn obsessed with convincing everybody that the first call was on an airphone. If they weren't just lying about the caller ID, flat out lying, and lying against the word of a police officer who would know better than to submit a false statement during a terrorism investigation. It's absurd to think that Lorne Lyles is lying about his wife's cell phone number being used. And we know it couldn't have possibly been used on the plane. So something is extremely fucked up about this. And
well, and see, but on that, it says using a GTE airphone.
Well, yeah, this is from the official report. This slide and this audio is from the official report.
And in his testimony, though, he's saying that it came from her cell number.
Yes.
It was not a GTE airphone number. It was her personal cell number.
It was her personal cell phone number and not any other number. And that's the beef that I have with this particular portion of the United 93 story.
Just saying it was a GTE airphone. We'll just say that it was. You still can't take away the fact that she whispers it's a frame.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it was an airphone.
There's a preponderance of problems with the official stories. You just listed 2 of them.
Yeah.
Right? The other one have to do with the nature of the crash itself. and the way the crash was documented and disseminated, the fact that there's no footage whatsoever of it, that there's no debris field. There's another story about there being debris found 3, 4, 5 miles away from the crash site, which if it crashed the way they said it did, would have been impossible. So I think, Shanksville is one of these essential mysteries to understanding the true nature of 9/11 as being this extremely fucked up, multifaceted conspiracy. And we just looked at one little tiny piece of it tonight.
Yeah. It's just sad. It's so sad.
Yeah. It's like watching a train wreck. You can't stop.
And, I'll say it again, whenever people want to talk, this would be conspiracy theory because it's to think that everything that we saw and believed and have been told and have been fed could possibly be a lie in one way or another.
It's scary to think, isn't it?
On this large of a scale, makes you think if it can be done at this large of a scale, what else are they capable of doing?
Yeah, I've thought that if they can pull off just the simple illusions that people have bought relative to United Flight 93, forget about the rest of 9/11. If they can buy this shit, then whoever perpetrated this thing can really get away with whatever they want. Now, I will say,
murder.
This is before high definition video. This is before
mind controlling.
This is before everybody had sensor technology in their pocket. This is before everybody had a camcorder with a walkie-talkie with a computer attached to it everywhere. And this was before,
I know the one angle that we showed the kids. A few of them had cell phones, but there were a few up there on the
little flipper phones.
They had flipper phones, and one kid ran back to his apartment
to get a camcorder.
Because
that was all low def 200 line video back in the day. I mean, think about it. DVDs had just come out in 1998, I think.
Yeah, he was walking down the street with his camcorder to record that footage that we watched.
And so none of it was instant. It was. It's just not the way it is now. Now there's this mesh blanket of devices that one would hope would make pulling off an incident like 9/11 impossible.
Well, I'm going to throw a wrinkle into that.
Please do, because we need more wrinkles at this point.
What if you systematically roll out something like that? Yeah. What if you systematically roll out something like that over a series of years to propagate you see the way one thing works and on a scale.
So you figure out how to do it with the new technology in place anyway.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. I've always thought
won't get into that because we're discussing 9/11. But
that's actually a really wise thing to observe, because if you think about the greatest technology that's available to consumers right now, the refinement, the advanced nature of the technology, the smartness of the solutions,
you have to find a way around that smartness.
Yeah, but think about who's developing that technology and the underpinnings of that. In other words, this is all sloppy seconds by the time consumers get it.
Absolutely.
The intelligence agencies, the megacorps, the real concentrators of wealth in society always have access to the newest, most reliable stuff, whether it's medical or communications or travel or whatever.
Yeah.
So they probably are thinking about, well, if we needed to do that one again, how would we do it in 2020 instead of 2001?
And it would take a lot of prep work, and it would take a lot of stage setting. It would take a course of months, if not years, to gradually groom a society into a certain way of acting and performing and being and thinking. And then eventually you are able to pull off another.
Yeah, well, I hope there's not another one like this. I really do.
Well, I'm gonna let you sit with that statement and just say, in these trying times,
In these difficult times.
we'll leave it there.
Yep, we'll leave it there. We are going to continue the series on remembering 9/11
Yeah.
over the next several episodes.
And again, we are not. These are just our thoughts, our theories, our just talking points. We mean no offense whatsoever to anyone
Yes.
who has suffered or lost a loved one, because we know that many, many people have been affected and lost lives.
And we want to get to the truth
and
of
are
it
still sick.
in order to honor their memory and honor their wellness.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody agrees. A majority of Americans believe that the official story is essentially in whole or in part
What was
not
the
true.
percentage that you found? The
Over half.
over half of U.S. Americans believe that there's more to it than we're being told.
Well,
That
over
there-
half believe that it's false either in true or in part. And it only takes
Right.
it to be false in one small part for you to start going, wait a fucking
Well,
minute.
and see, if we were in court, all you have to do for reasonable doubt is to prove that there's the potential for one thing to be false,
Yeah.
to plant the seed of reasonable doubt.
Well, there's plenty of reasonable doubt
Absolutely.
about 9/11, and I'm just gonna start and end with my reasonable doubt about 9/11 is that I don't necessarily believe that any 19 of my devoutly religious friends would ever do something like that, and I've got to believe that just because they're Arab and just because they're Muslim doesn't mean that they would be any different from my devoutly religious friends and go and do something so heinous. Well, Jazmine, this has been a wonderful, fun, reflective episode. These are deep, intriguing, upsetting subjects, but it is relieving and rewarding to work through them with you. And so, is there anything else you'd like to say before we sign off?
Not really.
I'd like to
Just
say one more thing.
How do you turn that thing off?
And stay out of trouble. How do you turn this